My name is Chase Rend. I'm the executive director here at the museum, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you. This is a great crowd, and for good reason, because we've got such a wonderful speaker today. The Smart Growth Speaker Series is presented in association with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the Smart Growth Network. And of course, we're grateful for their support, which allows us to provide these really interesting programs. We are proud to note today that 2012 marks the 15th year of the Smart Growth Speaker Series. The series has continued monthly since the inaugural program in 1997. That's quite a track record. And we've been covering a broad array of topics and furthering the museum's mission of advancing the quality of the built environment by educating people about its impact on their lives. Today, the museum is delighted to welcome a champion of the smart growth movement and a great friend of the museum, Harriet Tregoning. Now, a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Harriet's background, but she carries an incredible array of credentials, and I do want to run quickly over them. Yes, I do, because it's important. It's impressive. Harriet is the director currently of the Washington, D.C. Office of Planning, where she works to make D.C. a walkable, bikeable, eminently livable, globally competitive, and sustainable city. Prior to this, she was director of the Governor's Institute on Community Design and co-founder with former Maryland Governor Glendening and executive director of the Smart Growth Leadership Institute. She developed her expertise in state-level action in the state of Maryland, where she served Governor Glendening as both Secretary of Planning and then as the nation's first state-level cabinet secretary for smart growth. Prior to her tenure in Maryland, in the Maryland state government, Harriet was the Director of Development, Community and Environment at the U.S. EPA, and her academic training is in engineering and public policy. She was a Loeb Fellow at Harvard University Graduate School of Design for 2003 and 2004. At the conclusion of Harriet's presentation, she will be joined on stage by Melissa Bird, who is with the D.C. Office of Planning. She is the Ward 6 Neighborhood Planning Coordinator and project for this land use study. So now please join me in welcoming Harriet Tregoning. Harriet?
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm really thrilled that we have such a great turnout today, and some of the stats, I guess I would say, that Chase cited at the beginning. To me, one of the most interesting was just, it is 15 years for the Smart Growth Speaker Series, which is something that I started when I was at EPA. So, you know, there's a project that's really kind of had a long life, and I'm delighted to see that it's continuing to happen, because I think, like many of you, I sort of find it endlessly fascinating, the ways in which we can improve our city and our neighborhoods, and I think the opportunities to do that for our city have never been brighter. So it's really great to be here. I'm going to warn you about this presentation. It is lousy with information. It is chock-a-block with information, and if I spent the time on every slide that it really deserves, we'd be here for hours and hours. So I will mention that I am going to be doing this again in front of a joint council hearing. Jonathan Cass is here in the audience, who works for Councilmember Tommy Wells, but Councilmember Che, Councilmember Wells, and Council Chairman Kwame Brown are going to hold a joint hearing where this study is going to be featured, coming up when, Jonathan?
February 1st, 10:30.
February 1st at 10:30. So not only will you'll get a chance to hear some of this in more detail if you're interested, but you'll also get a chance to weigh in on some of it if you'd like to do that, if you want to sign up to to testify or to make comments. So there'll be more opportunities to look at this, and I think we'll have both the study itself and the presentation posted now or by the end of the day on our website at OP, so you can go over it to your heart's content. So I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview. So think of it that way, because you'll have lots of chances to hear more about it if you want to. as you know, we're planning a 37-mile-plus streetcar system for the District of Columbia. This is a project primarily of the Department of Transportation, of the District Department of Transportation. But as many of you know, it's our transportation infrastructure that really shapes our neighborhoods and our development. And so we really wanted to look at the land use relationship to any proposed investment in streetcar and really try to understand what the implications are, the good, the bad, and the other. So it could also inform us as a city, what are the actions that we would need to take before we made this investment, while we're making this investment, immediately after the investment, to enhance the positive and ameliorate the negative impacts. So this is kind of a high-level look at what some of those implications are. So we're going to start by talking about the benefits. In some cases, the quantitative benefits that we've been able to come up with, what some of the challenges are, and how we might mitigate them. And we're going to look a little bit corridor by corridor. Let me be really clear about this. We haven't picked, as a city, any alignments except for the tracks that are already being built. So the corridors are the general areas where streetcar might go, and a lot of them are in fact historic streetcar corridors or current corridors for major bus transit. So it's, it's a no-brainer in some cases where you're likely to try to want to put that enhanced transportation service, but no particular alignments have been yet selected. That'll be part of a much more in-depth environmental and community-involved process. But we did go ahead and look at some things that weren't on the original map to see if we were to take the streetcar in a slightly different direction here or there, might we be able to pick up some interesting opportunities. And again, how do we optimize the positive and deal with the negative? So the total length of the system is 37 miles that's been proposed, and as I said, DDOT is leading that system planning, but we're looking at the land use implications. I'm going to plead with you to ignore any discussion of phasing, because that is that it's not really so relevant now. This was how it was discussed initially, but I think the phasing of the streetcar is something that's still a function of how we're going to finance it and a bunch of other issues that we're working out with the Federal Department of Transportation. We're looking at some things that you may not think of as being related to land use. One of those is jobs and access to jobs. And what does the addition of this type of transit service do to the attractiveness of the city as a place for jobs to come? And then what are those impacts? So that's kind of the purpose of the study. But let's talk about the city and streetcar. As most of you probably know, we were once a streetcar city. Between 1862 and 1962, we had a pretty robust streetcar system that was, as I recall, more than 100 miles. So 37 miles seems kind of modest in comparison, but we didn't have Metro Rail. So 37 miles might be a good start on a network. What's important to know is that Metro Rail has been incredibly important in the city in terms of shaping where development has gone. I mean, can't even imagine our future without it, but as great as it isn't everywhere in the city. And there are very different benefits that come to neighborhoods that have access to what I would call premium transit. That would be transit that has a certain capacity, that's reliable, so it comes at least during the peak hour every 10 minutes. Something that you could really count on as a substitute for some other mode of travel. Streetcars running above ground, they're legible. You sort of don't have to ask where that transit goes, because you can see where the rail is headed. And it would be as many of you know from being in other cities in particular, it's a really great way to experience the city. And we did look at other cities. We looked at Seattle, where the focus was really about connecting to jobs. We looked at Portland, where it really helped to revitalize the Pearl District, among other things. Really amazing. We have a lot of retail, and you'd think of as completely established and not in need of any help, like Market Street in San Francisco. There were tangible benefits when streetcar service was added. Why streetcar? Right? We have other transit options here. A streetcar make the most sense for the city. And I will say we didn't do an exhaustive cost-benefit analysis, but we did ask the question, and I almost think this is a question we would need to ask ourselves on every line and for every part of the city. But there are big differences. Some of the other types of what I would call rapid transit include something called bus rapid transit. I think in Montgomery County they're calling they're calling it rapid transit, and the vehicles rapid transit vehicles. I think you have to put a quarter in the jar every time you say the word bus, because part of what they're trying to do is to brand the service so that people who can't imagine themselves on the bus for whatever reason would really look at this as an option. And bus is certainly easier, cheaper. You could put it in much more quickly. One of the differences with buses is, as you know, bus routes change. They can move all the time, and so what we have not had an experience with in the U.S. is having property owners make substantial investments around bus corridors the way they have around rail corridors, because the very convenience and ease of change means that people don't have the certainty that transportation is going to continue to be there outside their door in a way that would make them want to make a big investment. Heavy rail costs a lot. We're not building a lot of new subways, a lot of new metro. Almost everything that's happening in our surrounding jurisdictions is light rail or some other less costly alternative to heavy rail, and that's definitely cost prohibitive for us. But streetcar, we think, is competitive, and part of what we looked at is what happens to land use and what happens to property value along a proposed streetcar line. So what we did is not look, miles and miles away, but a pretty narrow band, land within a quarter mile of a proposed streetcar line. That's a 5-minute walk, more or less. And it's conservative. There might be property effects outside that quarter-mile band, but we thought, all the literature shows that a quarter mile definitely has effects. We looked at 9 different corridors, and they have different land use characteristics. I mean, we have some neighborhoods where the lot sizes are small, they're not, and the lots aren't very deep. So any change, that's likely to happen there might, probably won't mean a different building topology. It'll probably continue to be a small-scale building because of the way the city's been laid out. But that's not true in every corridor. So we try to look to see what might happen, because the characteristics of those corridors are very different, and the neighborhoods they run in are very different. So benefits of the streetcar. Premium transit, reliable, predictable, high-quality ride. This is kind of amazing to me. The streetcar lines would provide roughly 72,000 additional households with this access to rail. And that is very important, because along 44% of the corridor, households don't have a car. Okay, so 44% of the households along our transit corridor don't have a car. That's a little bit higher than the DC average. Right now, about 37% of households on average in the district don't have access to a car, and that is highly variable based on neighborhoods. I think in my neighborhood in Columbia Heights, it's closer to this 44% actually. And sometimes that's income driven. It's often choice driven, that if you can get along without a car, many households find it desirable to do so because it's an expense that household doesn't incur. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what this means, but right now we have roughly 15% of DC households that are, DC residents, I'll put it that way, that are within a quarter mile of rail. And most of that is nodes around metro stations. Because streetcar is linear, it all travels on the surface, the amount of real estate, the number of neighborhoods and households that kind of get touched by that corridor is big. So this streetcar proposal would triple the number of residents that are within a quarter mile of rail. So we'd be very close to 50% of households and of residents in the district, which is a pretty big number. Quality of life, it expands access in a way that's very interesting. We particularly looked at jobs, that you kind of can't have much of a quality of life if you're not employed. And so getting people access to jobs is very important. One of the things that our study identified is that already a high percentage of the jobs that are expected to come to the district over the next 20 years would be expected to come near the proposed streetcar corridors, but a higher percentage still would come if we built the streetcar, that they would choose to locate along these corridors and provide that access. There are many neighborhoods that are transit dependent that don't have great or convenient access to some of the job centers of the district. So this really changes the picture in many neighborhoods. And this purple chart basically shows the impact of improved access. And the darker the purple, the better it is for those neighborhoods in terms of how quickly they can get to the job centers of the city. And so that makes a big difference. It costs household transportation costs. So most of you know that according to AAA, it costs more than $8,000 a year to own and operate a car. That is that's money that you don't get back. You can't take your car to the car dealer and say, when you want to sell it, I want that. I've been paying this for the last 4 years. Give it all back to me. There are other investments people can make with that money. They can invest in housing. They can invest in education. They can invest in other things. And that's a great benefit of being here in the city. Some people have attributed our big population increase and the large number of young people who are moving here with their college degrees to this fact that we're a city that you can live in without a car, and given the crushing debt that recent college graduates have, it means you could pay off those student loans much, much more quickly. So, we think that's actually kind of a compelling argument, but it's also great that the benefit for lower income households, because as a proportion of their total cost, they spend a much higher percentage of their budget on transportation than higher income households. So to cut those transportation costs has a disproportionately good effect on those households. Some people would call streetcars and any kind of transit as a pedestrian assist, because almost every transit trip begins with walking. Right? And the way you get to transit typically is walk. Now, some people bike share as well, or figure out other ways to get there, but walking is really important. And so it really extends the walk and increases a lot of pedestrian activity. And we've identified in the dark red areas that I would call today predominantly auto-oriented in character. They become much more pedestrian-oriented with the addition of streetcar. And they're those kind of dark, those light red areas that are becoming more walkable because of a potential streetcar. Growth of main streets. It expands the area in which this increased pedestrian activity helps support retail. Kind of a rule of thumb, 1,000 new households supports 1 new block of retail. That's kind of what it would take. So it helps to rebalance some of our commercial streets that have become very auto-oriented by bringing them different types of customers, people on foot and on bike. So again, the color coding here is how much development potential there is for new neighborhood retail based on population and these new lines. So the darker the red, kind of the more new retail opportunity there is. It improves access to schools. We don't really have a bus system in the city except for special needs students, and so most of our kids get to their schools, using transit, and this helps a lot more kids get to a lot more schools, and we're already an environment that's rich in choice, and this helps to support that. preserves historic resources. Many of our neighborhoods actually were developed or really grew and matured around the streetcar lines that used to exist. In some historic districts there, and we've identified them in pink, the addition of streetcar would help with their revival, and we think that because of the availability of historic preservation tax credits that we would actually see some revitalization of those historic buildings. It expands some housing choices, and let's talk about that. Areas that don't have much market rate or mixed income housing would gain it. New housing types would come on. In areas that are higher income, many of you know that we have passed a law in the district called inclusionary zoning. So when we build new market rate housing of 10 units or more, it's required that you include affordable units. So anything that would spur considerable new market rate would also bring with it 8 to 10% affordable units. So let's talk a little bit about that. The benefits are biggest where the streetcar provides access to undeveloped areas, including some areas east of the river, but it also helps to expand some existing commercial districts and increase everybody's access in the district to places that we'd already consider to be high amenity areas. It definitely builds property value, and this is kind of worth spending a little bit of time on. We don't have 9 wards, so these are the 9 corridors, and this is where it would be helpful to have the study or the presentation open in front of you. But you saw where they were in the city roughly, and that they basically cover most parts of the city, some of our highest value real estate, like on K Street, but also all the way up Georgia Avenue, where the lots are really small, out to Rhode Island, across the river, in Anacostia, so a lot of different parts of the city. And not surprisingly, the increase might depend on kind of what the base is and the base real estate value. So it's extremely variable. And not every place has vacant land or the opportunity for there to be new development. So that lighter color is aggregate value of new property. And the darker is the aggregate increase in the value of existing property. So not every part of the city has the same opportunity in either of those categories. And that there's a range of increase from 2 to 10% in terms of where residential property would fall. And the places that have the higher numbers are multifamily high-rise buildings that we're looking at. So it's not like single-family homes are going to necessarily see that kind of an increase in property value. And the rates would increase differently in different corridors. And this, I will say, we think is a conservative estimate, but we're trying to get an idea about what would be happening to value in the city and whether or not theoretically that would create a capacity for the city to finance some part of the streetcar system. It would increase residential property value, we think, by $1 to $1.6 billion, primarily in the core and in areas least served by Metro. So again, the darker the area, the more significant the property value increase. And most property value looks like it's coming up between 5 and 12%. Excuse me. Office would rise in the quarters by 15%, and again, the demand and the change would be greatest in the areas with the darkest color. But 80% of the new office demand would occur in corridors with a lot of underdeveloped land and poor transit access. I think it's safe to say, so Poplar Point would be one of those places, for instance. This study looked at existing land, existing footprint, existing vacancy, and when it talks about underdeveloped, it's relative to current zoning. We didn't look at all at any zoning changes in this study. We just looked at what's currently there and zoned. It might make sense at some point to look at those kinds of land use changes in the context of a much more detailed corridor-specific plan, but this is kind of a snapshot at what would happen just as things are in terms of the current land uses and the current zoning. Retail would go up significantly. You've probably heard me say or heard it said in the city that we're under-retailed significantly. We leak about $1 billion in sales to the surrounding jurisdictions because Washingtonians like to shop and they like to go where the merchandise is that they want to buy. And for many years that has not been in the district for some of the things people want to buy. This would help a great deal to bring additional retail choices along streetcar corridors and boost that retail spending. Economic and fiscal benefits. We've also done some studies in planning about the creative economy, which is about 10% of our current employment. And one of the things we love about Streetcar is that we've got a lot of aging commercial corridors with a lot of quirky space, second and third story space above retail kind of throughout the city. Streetcar begins to make these places really interesting for creative occupations. Imagine instead of all of the jobs, or such an enormous percentage of the jobs being downtown, that we actually had a lot more businesses on our older commercial corridors along Mount Pleasant Street, along the upper parts of 14th Street, along Georgia Avenue, where you had daytime activity and people walking around and commerce happening there and people able to live very near where those jobs are. So we think Streetcar would have a big effect on that and would help us both to retain the creative firms that we have and attract new ones, and as I say, really revive some of those corridors. So we're not doing too shabbily on attracting new residents, and I don't know that I wouldn't juke these numbers higher based on some of the recent census information we've been getting. But basically what we're saying here is over our current projection, which is pretty robust, that Streetcar would bring additional residents to the district over our current projections over 10 years, and that we do a better job retaining some of the households that we have. And that is about 1,400 new households a year that we would attribute just to the fact that the streetcar is here. So that is kind of exciting to think about. We also think we'd have a similar effect on jobs, that the convenience of that transit and the fact that smart people with degrees like a walkable lifestyle more and more, and would want to cluster in neighborhoods that had that. With Streetcar, we create a lot more of those neighborhoods. We enhance more of those neighborhoods, and more jobs would come because of it. Along the streetcar routes, but also in places that already have a significant concentration of jobs. I don't know if any of you read the Thomas Heath article, what's today, on Monday, that talked about a software company where the company's owner said, 10 years ago he would have been a Virginia headquarters, but now he's in Washington because everyone he wants to hire already lives here. That was music to my ears. But this is what would help to magnify that effect. And tax revenue. So, the property value increases are obviously accompanied by some increases in taxes, and more residents means more income tax. We're a city that has less than 60% of its land on its tax rolls. So I don't know how many of you know that, but it's a real challenge for any city to operate under those circumstances. And we don't really have any control over what new embassy buys what new building, or what new nonprofit buys a piece of land and takes it off the tax rolls. But that erodes our tax base, and it's tough to make things work and balance. And so doing things to make us more fiscally stable is a long-term goal of this mayor and the mayors that preceded him, in fact, because it's a challenge. Speaking of challenges, housing affordability. From a revenue perspective, it's great to talk about how the streetcar is going to increase property value, but one of the core values of Washington is that we want to be a place that's inclusive. that no matter what your income, that you can live anywhere in the city. That's the idea behind inclusionary zoning. So what this shows is the degree of challenge to housing affordability that's associated with that property value increase we talked about earlier. The darker the color, the more housing that's currently affordable would be at risk. So what can we do about it? I mentioned that we already have inclusionary zoning, which is great. The other thing that we're trying to do is look at where we have large tracts of public land. And we've also been saying to our housing authorities, DHCD and others, that if we have land already that we've acquired or have in our portfolio that's near these routes, hang on to it. If you're doing acquisition, please look at these corridors so that you can make strategic acquisitions, because there's nothing more valuable to families of modest means, households of modest means, than to have that transit right there. That's their access to jobs, to education, everything. It's very important that we have it. So to preserve existing housing, particularly along those corridors, but to basically be strategic. To be very strategic about this now that we're beginning to study it and understand it. I mentioned all the businesses that would like to be along streetcar corridors. We also recognize that that might actually draw some businesses from other streets. The streetcar corridors aren't the only streets in the city that we care about. So we would expect more market interest along the corridors, and rightly so, property owners that have businesses that may or may not end up on a streetcar corridor are concerned about those impacts. So not everybody actually gets the same benefit from being on a streetcar corridor. If you're a straight-up retail establishment, streetcar is probably not a bad thing for you, but there are other uses that are on these streets that maybe don't need to have that access. Making sure that the zoning and the development policies that we put in place along these streets help to promote a mix of uses. I mentioned that having businesses on the second and third floors of buildings, those are customers that can help retail uses, whether or not they're on a streetcar corridor, be more viable. So looking at other ways that we can help make sure that for blocks on either side of a proposed streetcar corridor, we have a robust business activity. Not every one of the streets that is being talked about is actually a great street for a streetcar, because some of them have parking that's very important to the residents and the businesses of those streets. They're heavy streets for loading. If we restrict on-street parking during the peak but allow it in other times, we can't actually have a lane that appears and disappears because, as I said, the track, it doesn't move. Congestion is a problem in other areas. So these are all challenges that we have to address going forward. So we need development tools that can begin to address some of these challenges, including the primary challenge. The mayor has very boldly put nearly $100 million into the capital budget for streetcar, which is more than we've ever had to begin to deal with this, but to begin to build out the system. But that doesn't nearly cover the cost, which is in excess of $1 billion to build the streetcar system. So, what are the ways in which we can finance this? So we're looking at, what kind of mechanisms could be used to help finance not just the construction, there's also the operating cost. Can we use bid structures? Could we look at joint development? Can we, do other things in advance of the streetcar that would make it easier for it to be planned, delivered, and built? We're looking at land use tools as well, and this basically looks at the potential for changes in allowable density. It basically is a forward look. The colors are percent of the available capacity that would be necessary to accommodate the new development that's there, or that we project to be coming. So the green areas would suggest that that there's going to be a lot more demand to be there than there is capacity. The red suggests that we might have enough capacity. It doesn't say we're going to change the zoning, but it basically is showing you where you have a potential mismatch between the desirability of those places. It also suggests price pressure that these places are going to feel if you can't accommodate with more supply. Infrastructure. We need to coordinate with all of our different infrastructure investments to make sure we have as seamless a connection as possible among our different transportation modes. Let me just conclude by mentioning what some of our next steps are. As you know, we'll have our streetcar service in 2013. You'll be seeing streetcars actually run in this calendar year on H Street. They won't be in revenue service, but they'll be kind of gearing up for all that. There has to be a lot of actual operations of the cars on the tracks before they can be open to the public. But we have a lot of ongoing planning and coordination that we need to be doing. This is the big picture look, but anytime we look at a particular corridor and where we're going to be looking to make a next investment, we really need to be meeting with businesses and neighborhoods and doing a lot of that much more detailed planning that we are actually very much looking forward to doing with all of you. So I'm going to stop here. And I'm going to ask Melissa Bird, who's the project manager in my office for the study, to join me. And we would be really happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thanks for the excellent presentation. I noticed Wisconsin Avenue is not one of the corridors, and I'm aware that you asked us not focus on that. But to me, that's a critical area. What would it take to get Wisconsin Avenue on the corridor list?
We've had that question before from Councilmember Che. We looked at the corridors that were proposed originally by DDOT for this study, but we certainly have heard interest from people in Ward 3 and the council about looking at Wisconsin Avenue, and we are doing sort of an addendum memo for Wisconsin Avenue. Unfortunately, it's not finalized with this document, but should be finalized in the next month or so.
Let's go to the back here.
I actually have two questions. One is, you stated that you looked at streetcar systems in other cities, Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. Why not Baltimore? Okay, that's one. The other one is, you said that the system will extend service to 72,000 households, and somewhere along the line, I think that extrapolated to a little less than half of total households in the city. Does that mean that there are 150-some thousand households in the district?
That was sort of the delta. So there are about 250,000 households in the district. There are about like I said, it's about 48% of households would be within a quarter mile of rail, and currently about 15% are within a quarter mile of rail. So they're those lucky households that are right around a metro station. So, you know, I can look back at the numbers, but those are the right things. And we looked at many more cities and their streetcar systems. I just pulled out a couple of examples that illustrated particular things, but certainly we looked at a lot of them, and I'm personally very familiar with Baltimore's system, and so were some of the folks that are on it. But
Can we get a copy of this presentation?
It'll be on our website, so as will the whole study, so you can dive as deep as you want, and we look forward to hearing any comments or suggestions you might have about it.
The study is currently on the website now, and we'll have the presentation up by tomorrow morning.
www.planning.dc.gov,
and it's under our citywide initiatives.
And also, just to let everybody know, we are filming this program, so you'll be able to see Harriet's presentation in full on our website, which is www.mbm.
Over and over again. If you can't get to sleep late at night, you'll know what to do.
Hi, I have a really quick question, but it involves having the graphic back up. Just any of the graphics with the map. Because I couldn't actually figure out what the westernmost point was on the map. Yeah, like where is that?
That's
at the bottom. It's like this nice straight line.
Benning Road?
On the west. That's
Benning, Rhode Island Avenue?
You're looking at the east?
Georgetown.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Yeah, K Street corridor, so somewhere in Georgetown.
Are you sure? I don't see Rock Creek on there. That's the, I don't.
Arrows to a stream at that point, so that's probably
It's a little, yeah, there you go.
Here, so there's, I mean, again, believe me, how it gets through Georgetown is something we don't know. So it's a broad band.
That's a whole other study.
Yeah. That's the intention. I mean, we don't have a lot of good east-west in the city, as you know. So K Street is one of those places. And so, yeah, this is a big expanse of east-west, which would be great for the city.
And are you comfortable with leaving the map up there?
I am.
Okay, we'll leave that up there so people have reference.
Hi, I wonder if we can talk about the 8th Street Northeast corridor that has some lines already in place. What are the plans for turning the cars around or putting cars up, putting up the electric lines, and maintaining the cars and the development of that 8th Street Northeast corridor?
Yeah, this is where I really wish my colleagues from DDOT were sitting up here with me. So I'm going to defer those questions to DDOT, since I'm just the lowly planner. I'm not saying that those answers aren't out there. I'm just saying that it's not my decisions to make about some of those things. But if you would like, I'd be very happy to make note of your questions and pass them along to our colleagues at DDOT. They just actually hired yesterday a new head of the administration that's going to run Streetcars. So that person just got named yesterday.
I'd just like to follow up with, how can you put tracks down if you don't know what the rest of the plan involves?
Well, the system gets built in increments, and I think the termini are temporary, as you can sort of see from this example, that along H Street, we're talking about eventually coming up to K and then all the way over. So what happens, right on that segment of H Street is only, going to be a termini for a short period of time, because you can see the actual termini are quite a bit longer. So there's a proposed facility for maintenance that's there. There are several options for how, how the H Street train might make the movements that it needs to make to get up and over to Georgetown, but some of those things haven't been decided yet. So what's happening at H Street on either end, I think it's safe to call interim.
And to be clear, the tracks were put in as part of a larger streetscape initiative, and the idea was that we would only have to tear the road up one time, not twice. DDOT had a couple of meetings regarding the turnaround at H Street, and it was very clear from the community that they preferred it to go over the bridge and not through the neighborhood, and I believe DDOT has gotten that message.
As you know, most of the mass transit in American cities was by private industry, and it was a for-profit venture. And oftentimes it was real estate companies who owned land in a place and they wanted to increase the value, as you rightly pointed out does happen. Are there plans to have that kind of value capture to help fund some of this from the private sector? Have other cities been able to do this?
As you say, our city did it very successfully. The Chevy Chase Land Company, was a streetcar real estate venture. So, yeah, I mean, we're having those conversations right now with property owners. I mean, the funny thing is that the value proposition, at least for some people, is pretty clear. The premiums that you can get in rent from being near transit is and how quickly your buildings lease up, et cetera, is a known quantity. What's challenging for us is that we want to finance the whole system, and our neighborhoods have very different character. Nobody wants K Street to be everywhere. We love K Street, but we don't want it everywhere. So trying to figure out how to blend the financing for the capital and for the operating so that we get a system. Because a single line, doesn't do as much for us as having the whole system effects. So we're trying to figure out how we can finance the whole thing, given the different ability of different parts of the city to throw off the revenue that would pay for capital and or maintenance. But yes, there's absolutely a dialogue that's going on right now, and a lot of interest. People can see the value of having this additional transit service.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting presentation. And I really think that the setting up the route is just 50% of the work. Another 50% have to come from the operation. Some time ago, I put them on Arlington's map, all those bus system, etc., how much area is covered by walking distance. And very large part was covered, but still doesn't work. Because in some part, one bus runs one bus every hour. It really doesn't work. Or it's more limited. So I think in all of those lines, more dispersed or more concentrated in certain lines and make more frequent, more usable operating system. I think it's probably something really needed.
You make a very good point about operations and how we operate our transit system. And there's a great statistic about Washington. 97% of residents are within a quarter mile of transit if you count bus service, and if you count that transit that only comes during rush hour during the week, right? Not that useful, as a real transportation mode for many people. So, part of the idea behind the streetcar is to bring very high quality, very frequent service to parts of the city that don't have it, and to meld that service with existing bus, with improvements in existing bus, so that we really have seamless operations among our various transit systems. But that's a great point about operations.
Thanks. Dan Goldstein, DC Mud, DCRealEstate.com. In the same vein, wondering if you can also talk about efforts that you're making to integrate this plan, say, with other plans as well, such as, I think, Virginia, the Columbia Pike Streetcar Plan, as well as expansions for MARC. And I guess there's a second question in there, is considering how much trouble Metro is in right now with funding, how difficult do you imagine it's going to be to get the rest of the $900 million you're going to need to build this, considering in how much dire straits Metro is for funding?
Well, Metro, everyone I think agrees with the value of Metro. It's just that none of us have ever taken a step to fund the regional system with a dedicated funding source, right? So that's probably a mistake we won't make with this. Part of the other reason that we have this proliferation of other transit options in other jurisdictions is that the issues about Metro and its very regional character, make it hard to raise that money. That's why our circulator bus system was the last among our surrounding jurisdictions in terms of its own bus system that was separate from the service that WMATA runs. So we need a bigger transit conversation, in our region about this, but we are having discussions with our surrounding jurisdictions about how we link up the service. On the one hand, more and better transit seems like it would be good for our region, and the more we can build that conversation into the interests of landowners who might be able to help pay for it, the better off I think we're going to be, and work with local governments to shape that land use or let that land use be affected by that transit service. But I'm not holding out this plan as the thing that solves our regional transit issues. We have a lot of work to do, but I think we are a region, maybe unlike any other in the country, that has absolutely recognized that our future is with transit.
As I recall, the old
Who's
transit,
speaking?
This is
okay.
As I recall, the old streetcar system in D.C. was powered by a third rail, an underground rail, which precluded overhead wires and so forth. How will the new system be powered? Will it be powered overhead or underground?
We have a lot of limitations in the District of Columbia. In some ways, they're happy limitations because we have such incredible views and such great historic resources that we would really like to have those views be unencumbered by even the little catenary that's associated with the modern streetcar. So we've done some things and gotten a little help from the federal FTA, the Transit Administration, to put out a solicitation for battery-powered vehicles and to really try to force the improvement in battery-operated transit vehicles, especially streetcars. So we're seeing some very positive results from that. The initial plans for H Street involve a catenary system, so they'll be electric with a line, but our hope is that that's also temporary and that we'd be able to run the streetcar throughout the city eventually without having to use overhead wires. But initially there will be some overhead wires, and I think even permanently, because you can imagine a situation in our town that might involve a motorcade, an accident, some other things that would have a streetcar stuck with the air conditioning running for maybe an hour or more, and that you'd want to be able to get to some electric power if your battery ended up, running out. So there'll still be some overhead wire, even in an ultimate system, but we're hoping to start with overheads and be able to move quickly to battery-operated streetcars.
Hi, Montgomery County Councilmember Hans Raymer. I've been excited to hear all the great talk about regional focus and appreciating the collaborative spirit and some of the direct conversations that are happening between our two jurisdictions. And I guess I'm learning that, transportation aspects of this are much more within the transportation department. But on the planning side, I would think that we should talk about some of these corridors, like Georgia Avenue, which goes all the way, that goes all the way to Frederick County almost. So we should, our departments could sit down and talk about some of these gateways and how we can keep all the wonderful ideas that you're putting forward continuing through.
That's a great suggestion, and Roland Stanley is a longtime colleague of mine, and I would love to continue this conversation. Party at your house, how about that?
Any other questions from the back here? Anyone? Help me out. Here we go.
I'm Richard Westbrook, Committee of 100. I wonder if there was any projection of ridership on these various segments and lines so that we could come up with a cost-benefit ratio. They're not all going to be the same, obviously. Was there any of that in this original study?
DDOT has done some projections. DDOT has done some projections in their analysis. And I suspect that we'll get more into that as we progress through implementation.
But I would say, Richard, one of the things that we would expect to happen is that, as you know, by seeing where these streetcars run, bus lines run on some of those streetcars. Some of those are WMATA bus lines. We'd expect some substitution. We'd expect some people to move from bus to streetcar. We'd expect some people who aren't taking transit now to move to streetcar. So those are kind of the nature of those projections. So then what happens to that bus ridership? Does that mean that there'd be some degree of substitution, and maybe certain bus lines we wouldn't need to have any longer, depending on where and how they run. But for this study, we did not do that kind of detailed projection of ridership that would be necessary to do the cost-benefit analysis that you're talking about. And this is not intended to be a go or no-go on the system or any single line. That's going to be the subject of a more discrete and specific analysis where those decisions will be made, and those projections will also be part of it. This was more to say, we think Streetcar could have a big effect on a lot of things that we care about in neighborhoods around the city. Why don't we take a first look at what some of those might be so that we can start to take some actions now that might help to protect housing affordability and other things that we care about, and make take some of those actions now that would help us be better prepared if and when a streetcar system gets built.
Great, we have time for a couple more questions. I have one in the back here.
Former housers in the audience, can you talk a little bit more about the how this will impact affordable housing? And the other kind of interesting thing that I saw on the slideshow is that somehow how this would actually help historic preservation. There's a bunch of us from Arlington, and I think one of the concerns we have is that in preserving affordability and preserving historic preservation in the face of rising land values, sort of how to reconcile that likely event.
The first question was on housing affordability, and obviously things that increase property value and land value are going to put pressure on affordable housing, particularly on rental housing. There are existing tools that we have in the city that can help protect the rise of property taxes for long-time residents of modest means. So that's kind of an existing tool that we have, but we have a lot of multifamily, and increasingly we're going to have multifamily. So one of the things that Streetcar does is create demand for new multifamily in some parts of the city that may not have a lot of it now and may not have a lot of new affordable. So there will actually be new affordable housing that gets created, and because of inclusionary zoning, it'll be dedicated to people of modest means. But if we're going to protect affordable housing elsewhere, I mean, what we have to do is take land that the district controls and dedicate some of that to affordable housing if we hope to have it there. Where we have existing affordable housing along those routes, we're going to have to make sure that that housing gets preserved by putting our affordable housing money there. It really represents for our housing authorities in the district some strategic choices that we've kind of teed up. If we think this is where transit might be going, what's the value that we would put on making sure that we had a large supply of affordable housing along these new transportation corridors? Because it's only going to get more expensive to protect and preserve that housing if we don't act now. But also, our city has made a choice a long time ago that the places that it's cheapest to build the housing isn't necessarily where we want to build it, because it concentrates poverty and it's not where there are currently a lot of job opportunities. So that mix of incomes is what we're trying to achieve. And so part of the very explicit purpose in doing this initial land use study is to see where the housing pressures were going to be the greatest so that the government can act to protect and preserve that housing. Oh, the second question. Historic preservation. How does it help historic preservation? We have historic assets in parts of the city that haven't seen a lot of investment, and so those properties are likely to rise in value, and it'll be worth it to preserve them. We have the benefit of a historic preservation federal tax credit for commercial properties, and we've had some recent success with using that and the low-income housing tax credit to do affordable housing in historic buildings, and we'd really love to be doing a lot more of that. So, I wouldn't argue that it protects the existing historic resources that are already on thriving corridors. It doesn't have much of an effect, but in those places where those resources haven't seen a lot of investment, they could absolutely be enhanced, their preservation.
Well, on that note, I want to thank our presenters.